The bells of the Great September tolled across the city like slow iron hearts, and their sound walked the walls and red tiles of the Red Keep, troubling every idle stone with the memory of kings. In the small godswood clinging to the eastern wall, where thin cypresses leaned against heat-seared air and a transplanted weirwood spread foreign leaves without a face to watch them, Eddard Stark felt the bell vibrations travel the roots and up into his bones. Summer in the south smelled of tar and spilled wine and the sweet rot of the river. His thoughts slipped from the heat to the memory of wet bark in Winterfell, of snow-dusted needles and the hum of his father's gods listening long and silent. He had not gone to see the body. Robert had been spent before the bell ever stirred. His last words lost behind thickening breath and the smell of poppy. He had left a sealed parchment naming him protector, named Eddard before the gods and the realm to keep the seat until the rightful heir should come. The parchment lay now beneath his doublet, a weight made small by paper and great by the eyes it would draw. The gardens were quiet except for the cicadas and the distant sea. He had thought to wait to do justice openly. He had made a life out of waiting, of letting thy neighbor speak first and counting the lies he chose not to call by name. But waiting in King's Landing was another thing. Waiting in King's Landing meant waiting for knives. He heard a soft rustle of cloth before the man spoke. "My lord hand." Varys placed each word like a careful foot upon a loose stair. He appeared from behind a myrrh tree with a look of mild worry, hands folded in his sleeves. "A dread hour. I wish to bring solace and counsel, if it pleases you." "It does not please me," Ned said, though he did not draw steel. "Yet counsel is what I have for lack of wisdom, so speak." "Grief makes wise men hasty," Varys said, almost kindly. "The city is an eel. You may hold it by the head or the tail for a while, but if it is determined to slip, it will. Ser Barristan is honorable and dangerous to your friends. Littlefinger is dangerous to your honor and friendly as a cat. The Queen is dangerous to everyone." "Robert's writ is plain," Ned answered. He could hear the bells measuring out the hour like a pendulum counting his patience. "I will show it at first light, command the city watch, and place the boy in proper wardship. Stannis will come to claim what is his." Varys looked past him to the weirwood's unfocused leaves. "The city watch," he murmured, and Ned saw a half-smile in the lantern light. "Gold cloaks come dear to their captains. The captains come dear to those who feed them. A man's loyalty cannot be counted until his purse and his fear have been well balanced." "Then I will balance them," Ned said. "Honor was not a thing you traded. It was a stone at the center of a man, and a man's steps circled it or veered away." Varys tilted his head. "His Grace Joffrey is at the September, the Queen with him. Lord Renly is with his knights. They ride the dawn. Lord Peter is with the captains counting heads. Lord Stannis is elsewhere." He let the word trail like a thread over a dark well. "And there is a black brother waiting by the kitchen postern who begs a word with you. He carries straw in his beard and a smell like old leather, but he has eyes one remembers. He claims you sent for him, which is curious, because I do not recall the messenger." "Yoren," Ned said, "in the way a man names a rope in floodwater. The Night's Watch sent a ruffian once a year to take men from Flea Bottom's gutters to fill their lack. Yoren had the blunt, stubborn patience of a man accustomed to finding fish in foul streams. Send him to my chambers." Varys bowed. "It is a cruel kindness to watch a man walk the blade when the alley is safer. If you must show the parchment, do not do it before you are ready to run. Or better, do not run where they expect." He turned to go. "Varys," Ned said, and the eunuch stopped. "If any harm befalls my daughters, no web you spin will catch the storm I'll bring. Children," Varys said softly, "are the one coin I never spend, my lord. Even cats will not forgive you that." His eyes glimmered. "But the city forgives nothing. The bells sound very loud tonight." When the eunuch had gone, and the cicadas resumed their ancient counting, Ned touched the parchment beneath his doublet, then laid his hand against the weirwood's trunk. There was no face in it. In Winterfell, when he touched the heart tree, he could feel the cold that lived in it like breath. Here only heat. He left the garden by a narrow door used by wine sellers and men who preferred not to be seen. Yoren was waiting in his chamber, the straw of his hair flattened by sweat, a stone tankard in his hand. "You're late. I did not send for you." "No," Yoren set the tankard down with a dull knock. "But I figured you might need me. Riverlands is burning. Lannister riders scouring holds easto the Green Fork. Lot of men in cloaks a-skin, after girls with wolf looks and a lord with too much honor. You want to keep yours, you can't keep it here." Ned looked to the corner where two of his household guard had slumped on benches like tired dogs, their mail unbuckled, the night deep in their eyes. Jory was dead, shot in the eye on the street by Lannister men. The rest of his Winterfell men he had spent like coins trying to buy time. "I won't leave my daughters." Yoren scratched his jaw with a dirty nail. "One is betrothed to the prince who isn't king. She'll be watched from dawn to dusk. The other's a shadow with a sword. I can take the little one with me. A black cloak draws less cutthroats than a lord's banner. I got road lads, thieves and runts, and two smith's hands who'd pass for mules. We can pack Arya in with the lot and nobody'll smell wolf. As for the other, I can't steal a girl from a queen's sept unless the gods put my feet upon the ceiling." He was right, and Ned hated him for it. "I can fetch Sansa with a writ. The city watch belongs to them that paid last," Yoren said. "Beggin' your lordship's leave, you're a good man. Good men get other men dead in places like this. Take your parchment, take a road, and take your north while it's still there to take. Send for your banners and fetch your girls back with strength instead of ink." Fat Tom came in then with Hallis Mullen, and a chest with 3 fresh-sealed ravens lay ready on the table. Ned stared at them. He had written to Dragonstone to call Stannis to his right, and to Lysa in the Vale, though he knew the shape of her answer. He had not yet written to Winterfell. He had thought to send that one once the gold cloaks were set in his hand and the queen's children under guard. That had been this morning. Now the bells were tolling and the air smelled of rain that would not come. "Bring Arya," Ned said, and his voice felt like iron at his throat. "Pack her as Yoren says and do it without a word passing a third tongue. Hallis, take this." He drew out Robert's writ, the parchment crackling like leaves. "And keep it close. If I fall, this goes north. It names me protector until Stannis comes. If the queen moves against my children, it names her for what she is. Ser Barristan will read as he sees, if he lives to see it. But I'll not wager my girls on any man's eye. We ride before the dawn." "You'll not show it?" Fat Tom asked, aghast. "I'll show it in Winterfell," Ned said, "to men who did not sell their swords for gilded awe. I'll show it at Riverrun and at Moat Cailin and in White Harbor, where men still keep their oaths because their fathers did." Yoren nodded once, grave as a tree. "Good," he said. "Bring no more than 4. More than that stinks of lord. Down to the river by the fish market and into a barge. Boy with a bad hat is waiting. He'll take you up the Blackwater to where the reeds bite. There's a farmer with a lame mule. Ride the mule. The mule doesn't talk. Everything else will be argues and prayers." Ned slept not at all. He lay in his clothes with boots off. His sword leaned against the bed's carved post, and watched the window turn pale with false dawn. Twice he rose and reached toward the door that led to the girl's bedchamber. Twice he stopped. He could not take Sansa, and he dared not risk Arya by waking her to knowledge she could not bear quietly. He knelt and pressed his brow to the wood for a time, and when he stood, the skin of his forehead felt cool though the air did not. They left by the kitchen postern as Yoren had said, for men with cloaks mismatched and faces that belonged to dockside mornings, and a lord who had learned how to look like a tired soldier on the Trident long ago. Arya came in the middle of them with her hair hacked short to the ear and her chin up, wearing a boy's rough spun that hung on her like a curse she meant to master. She did not look at him. He felt relief like thirst slaked and grief like a blade. If he spoke to her, he would never let her go. They made the river as the sky pushed up a lighter stripe over the masts. The barge smelled of pitch and river mud. A boy with a bad hat and quick hands moved them among nets and eel baskets with the ease of born thieves. By the time the sun snared itself in the masts to the east, They were among the reeds where herons moved on witch thin legs, and men on the banks did not glance twice at a barge full of fish smell and cheap men. Yoren and Arya stayed on to go by the King's Road, a crawling pilgrimage of petty crimes and colder nights. Ned took the lame mule and Hallis took the farmer's other, and they cut west through fields where herricks stood like crouched towns. By midday, a dust of riders crossed their path at a distance, moving like a dark brushstroke toward the city, banners furled. There was laughter carried on the air, and the sound made Ned colder than steel. He kept the mule's head toward the hedges. At night, they slept in ditches. On the second morning, they turned north again and found the King's Road as it dragged itself through the country like an old scar. News traveled faster than hooves. By the time they reached the inn at the crossroads, the small folk had heard the bells and what the bells had meant, though their stories were all teeth and no bone. The innkeep had a rag for a hat and a smile for men who did not ask for rooms. They ate coarse bread, hard as work, dipped in onion broth and chased with beer that had the decency to be cold. Hallis watched the door. Ned listened to talk. And the queen burned the parchment and threw the eunuch in the river, and Lord Stark's men drew blades, but the gold cloaks turned, and the butcher's boy. Dragonstone's got a red which what puts shadow babies in your belly. My cousin saw one. Lord Tywin's riders turn fields into ash as soon as they're ripe enough to feed a fire. Ned rose to go when a pair of Sellswords with Lannister red in their clasps came in under the lintel grinning, and a young man with blue eyes and a smith's arms followed, unafraid in a way only youth and iron can be. Yoren slipped from the corner then, wearing his black cloak like a forgotten oath. Arya moved at his heel, her head bent, and for a heartbeat her face turned so he could see the raw-boned Stark in it and the street's rough edges at war with herself. His heart made a motion in his chest like a trapped bird. She did not see him. Yoren's eyes did and did not change. Ned finished his beer and went by the side door. They traveled by hard days and harder nights. Once near Duskendale they were chased by a dozen riders in iron half-helms, old cruelty in their laughter and fresh hunger in their seats. Hallis put an arrow through the lead rider's throat and they plunged into a gully choked with scrub, mules skidding and squealing. Ned's shoulder slid against stone and he tasted clay and blood. Fat Tom hauled him up with a grunt, and they moved again. By the time they reached the Trident, they had lost one mule and 2 illusions about the city's reach. The river was low and broad and slow at the ford where Robert had taken Rhaegar's life and crowned from him with a hammer. The memory lived in Ned like a bruise that healed and never did. He looked at the water, brown as old wine now, not red, and thought of how blood vanishes into rivers, becomes part of a larger flow without a name. He did not kneel. He crossed. Moat Cailin rose out of the bog like old anger, its 3 surviving towers black with age and lichened over, the causeway before it sunken and uncertain. The neck had always stunk of wet rot and green life and the untrustworthiness of ground that took weight grudgingly. When Ned stood upon the causeway stones at last, the wind from the fens brought him a smell he had not known he missed until it found him. Peat and brine and a wet cold that crawled inside a man and made him want fires and meat and silence. Behind the towers a plume of camp smoke climbed into a sky already grayer. They had come. The banners of the north stood in that weather like stubborn thoughts. The merman of House Manderly rippled pale green above white fur. The sunburst of Karstark showed angrier than the day. Flayed men of Dreadfort in their obscene red had been furled by someone discreet enough to keep them out of Ned's sight, though the air knew their color. The direwolf ran black and gray in a dozen places. The Gretchen's booming laugh traveled out upon the marsh and across the stones. 100 cookfires worked through hares and pigs and thin marsh birds that turned to meat if long enough held to flame. Men he knew greeted him with the lack of flourish that the North kept for love. Nods and grins and, in the Gretchen's case, a clap on the shoulder that jarred his bones. Robb stood as straight as a banner staff and looked older than yesterday. Gray wind prowled beside him, restless and large, licking at the damp air. When Robb took his father in his arms, he smelled of horse and leather and smoke and some new smell Ned tried to name and could not. "Father," Robb said. It was the voice he'd had as a boy, but it had picked up gravel, and that gravel had learned how to speak. Ned held him for a long breath. "Is Winterfell well?" Bran reads in the mornings and pretends he doesn't like it. Rickon will not be told. Maester Luwin sends his love and 20 ravens in your name to men who would have come without it. Ser Roderick has the castle, and we have the causeway. The Gretchen's grin was a wound that had healed badly and become a better man for it. You took your time, Stark. The marsh gnats have had 3 feasts on me and are measuring me for a 4th. I am glad they did not find you too tough, Ned said. I need you tender in the morning. The laugh that followed emptied lungs around the fire. Roose Bolton's eyes did not change when he smiled. You'll have meat, Bolton murmured. And blood. Tywin's dogs are running all over the Riverlands. If you mean to call banners and lift sieges, we must cross at the Twins and do it soon, or we will be relieving ashes. We cross, Ned said, and the marsh wind took the words like something that belonged to it. He could feel his ribs loosen with the rightness of saying a thing and being able to do it afterward. Walder Frey's bridge is the bridge the gods gave us. We'll pay what price is needed that does not dishonor us. Before that, I'll say my words. He looked to the causeway where the bogs waited like old men who had seen many kings. The realm has a king. It is not the boy in the city. Men crowded closer. The noise of spoons upon trencher would stilled. Ned said Stannis' name out loud and felt the worth of it. Sour iron and iron certainty. He is Robert's brother and the heir the law gives. The Queen's children are. He let the words stop in his throat. He had not wanted to speak it in a place with no sept and only the old gods listening, but he had written it already and the paper had been braver than his tongue. My business with King's Landing is done. Our business is to pull the lion's claws from the Riverlands and bring our people home, then stand behind the rightful king until the realm is quiet. We are Starks of Winterfell. We do not make kings. We guard them. The Great John spat into the fire. Good. I've no taste for crowns unless they keep my head dry. But if the South keeps stealing our sons, I'll hang my wet mantle on the first king's neck I find. We will take Riverrun first, Ned said. Then we will see who steals sons. That night he went alone to the marsh's edge. The causeway stones sat like old teeth in gums too soft. Reeds whispered, and small frogs made sounds like washers clicking. When he closed his eyes, Winterfell's heart tree rose up whole and tall inside him without being there. He saw snow making its old peace with the ground. He said no long prayer. Keep my girls, he whispered. I will bring them home. The bog said nothing, which was an answer the old gods gave often. At dawn the host moved. It was not a golden march. It was iron and wool and leather and patience. Men carried more bread than steel, and thanes argued with cooks and horses snorted in the fog. Gray wind ran from flank to flank, stopping to show his teeth at men who needed it and mothering boys who could have been his prey. The weather tasted of rain and did not give it. The Twins rose pale green from fields sunk with old flood. Walder Frey had built his castle with the same hunger he took wives, and the stone wore that appetite in it. Inside the great hall, the Lord of the Crossing sat upon a chair too high for him, with sons and grandsons and great-grandsons arranged like miser's jars upon shelves. He had sour milk in his face and spilt wine in his voice. Catelyn had found him once and hammered an agreement from his stink with nothing but need and the knife of her father's name. Ned had more to spend and less to beg for. Beside him stood Robb with his jaw set the way he said it when the Great John tested him and Grey Wind bit off 2 fingers and the Great John laughed to see his own blood and pledged himself. Ned had heard that tale upon the march and had said nothing. Some things earned their own silence. My Lord Frey, Ned said, and gave him the bow he would give a freeman whose woodlet he wished to cross without breaking a branch. This is the king's way, such as it is. We come with the law and the need. Name your terms, and we will name ours, and between us we'll find one that does not shame you or me. Frey smacked his tongue behind his thin lips. Law, is it? Law says I levy what levy I like. Law says I close my bridge and count my sheep while you eat swamp and story. But you've brought me a Stark and 1,000 bellies to feed, and if I were to turn you away with the Lannisters nipping at your whelps, I'd be a damned fool and a dead one by week's end. So, he leaned forward like a splinter. I want a betrothal. Ned had expected that and more. "You shall have one." "Two," Fry said at once. "One for a son and one for a daughter. No more of this Southron fancy of wedding who you fancy because you fancy it. I want the wolf's blood at my table within a year and my blood howling in Winterfell before I need a cane." "Robb is already spoken for by no one but his own heart," Ned said gently, to see what shape Frey's mouth would make. It made the shape of insult. "Rickon is young, and Bran will be a lord with lands to match his courtesy. I will pledge Bran's hand when he comes of age to one of your daughters, and I will foster one of your sons in Winterfell to learn how the North keeps faith. You will have my promise and Robb's that he will treat your boy and your daughter as his own. And I will promise another thing. We will not forget the crossing when the songs leave your name out of them as they do sometimes." Fry squinted. "Songs I can make by marrying enough singers. I want safety. Who will give an old man that?" "Men who remember," Ned said. "And boys fostered into men who remember. Name the son and name the daughter and send them with us. If that doesn't fill your plate, I'll send you 60 head of cattle from the Wintertown drovers come spring." The haggling took until the meat cooled. In the end, Fry took Bran's distant promise and a fosterage and the cattle, and a wolf's hide to hang above his hearth if the gods were kind. They crossed the bridge in the afternoon light, and the rumor of their going ran ahead like a thrown voice. Night found them on the south bank, and the next day they moved through country that looked like a woman with her hair burnt off. Fields cropped and blackened, hedges torn, villages charcoaled to ribs. A child's toy lay in a ditch, a wooden horse with one wool snapped. Ned's anger had always been a quiet thing that chose where to stand and stood there. He did not speak of it. He sent scouts ahead to sniff for Lannister forage parties and drew in his outriders where the hedges opened into flats that could look like safety to fools. 2 days from Riverrun, a harebrained courier found them with a tully fish on his breast and sweat on his face. "Ser Jaime has ringed the castle with steel," the lad gasped. "Edmure is taken. Lord Hoster is ill and has been ill. They say Ser Brynden is a black shade in the river and killed 3 men with a knife in the water." He swallowed. "They say the Kingslayer rides among his men with a grin he gets from killing. They say if the river runs red, he will drink it. Ser Jaime will find steel tastes poorly with river," the great Jon said. Ned called his captains. They were men who had led men before, and some who had never led but had the eyes for it. Meege Mormont with a bear's scowl and a prudence that was a kind of courage. Wyman Manderly's younger son Ser Wendell, who laughed easily and killed clean. Roose Bolton with his whispers and his leeches and his patience. Rickard Karstark, long-boned and grieving still for a son he would name later when a new grief gave him cause. Robb stood among them at the end of the table with his hands behind his back, not trusting them, which Ned approved. "Jaime will expect us to come for the siege head-on," Ned said, drawing the map with a charcoal stick over a plank where meat had been moments ago. "He will keep his knights ready to break a charge and his infantry spread to keep the river safe from boats. He will not expect us to cross the Tumblestone in the night 3 miles upstream where the ford is shallow for swine but not for carts." He tapped the place. "Great Jon, you will take 500 men in leather and quiet feet and go by the blind ditch. Ser Brynden will know it. When you hear the Mallister horn, you will cut behind the Kingslayer's tent like a butcher making a new joint. The butcher's got to know what he's cutting," the great Jon said cheerfully. "I'll know him by the gold." "Robb," Ned said, and looked at his son until the boy-man's breath slowed. "You take the river road with Karstark and Mormont. Keep low, use the hedges, and when the horn sounds I want the western pickets gone. Do not chase. You are not there for glory. You are there to bar the road back and make the knights nervous." Roose Bolton blinked slowly. "And you, my lord?" "I will ride with Ser Wendell and the White Harbor men straight at the center as if I had no sense at all," Ned said. "They will not think I have it. They will be right. The center is where we break them while they look behind them. If we break them, we take Ser Jaime." "Alive?" Wendell Manderly asked, surprised and admiring both at once as if asked to juggle knives on a horse. "Alive if we can," Ned said. "A dead man's tongue tells nothing." They rode in the dark with the frogs for company and the stars like cold coins in a purse. The river spoke in glottal syllables to the shore, and the hedges made friends with their cloaks. Gray wind vanished and reappeared like a shadow given nobler purpose, brushing Rob's knee to remind him he was not alone and was responsible for it anyway. Near midnight, an owl looked down at them with the satisfaction of a small god that does not change but watches men who do. The Mal-Lister horn cut the night like wire across skin. The Great John roared back with something that started in his belt and moved outward, and then there was no more night. There was the crush of bodies trying to be elsewhere and horses screaming when they remembered they were animals and not banners. Ned's world narrowed to the line of men at his knee and his sword arm and the space a horse needs to breathe. He saw the gold flash of a helm, and then there was Ser Jaime Lannister in the moonlight, beautiful and terrible with a sword in his hand and that grin the boy had told them about. Their horses met between the lines like rams on a high place, and men died behind them without voices. "You should have stayed where they keep the snow," Jaime said, laughing, and cut. He was quick. Ned was patient. Jaime fought like a man who had never had a thing he wanted to last. Ned fought like a man who built houses and wanted to see them stand. The first time their blades kissed, Ned felt the strength in the Kingslayer's wrist. The second time he felt the cockiness, and the third time he felt the first thread of worry in the other man's breath. There was no fourth time. A Mal-Lister spear took Jaime's horse behind the saddle, and as the beast buckled, Ned spurred through and let the flat of his sword find the golden helm. Jaime toppled with the uncomprehending surprise that comes to men who have never thought gravity applied to them. Rob's shout rose near, fierce and young and edged, and then the center broke. They drew Jaime from the press before the press remembered to stop pressing. He was all blood at the edges and contempt in the eyes, like a boy who had been caught stealing a toy and dared you to call it stealing. "Ser Jaime?" Ned said, breath burning, shoulder singing where an iron-capped mace had glanced. "You are taken." "Am I?" Jaime said, spitting a tooth and something like laughter. "We will see who has whom, Lord Stark." They ran the Lannisters into the river and lit the night with the canvas of their tents. At dawn, Riverrun's gates opened and the Tully fish swam free again. Ser Brynden Blackfish met them on the lower bridge with a face that had never learned dissembling and never meant to. Edmure Tully had the fighting taken out of him by good steel and bad luck and was grateful to anyone who could put it back in. Catelyn stood upon the water stair and looked like a woman who had not slept since girlhood. Ned climbed to her and saw the years they had shared pass over her face like clouds that noticed him. "You were not meant to be here," she said, and then she was in his arms, her hair and cloth smelling of river and stubbornness. "But you are. I could not stay where the knives were counted by smiles," he said into her temple. "I have brought you a Kingslayer. What would we do with one of those?" she asked, weary humor her last weapon. He tasted the salt of old tears at the corner of her mouth and thought of Sansa and Arya, and how love is a thing that can be carried in 2 hands or 1,000 miles. They ate together in a smaller chamber where the stone remembered the river in its damp. Lord Hoster lay upstairs breathing with watery lungs and memory. The Blackfish took one look at Ned's shoulder and had a healer, and had 3 messengers for 3 different roads before the healer had threaded the needle. "Tywin will pull in his pickets and bite with all his teeth at once," Ser Brynden said. "If he's smart, he'll leave a thin siege and run for Harrenhal, where the walls look like they were built by men who remembered dragons and wanted to spite them. If he's proud, he'll come on at us and drown in the Red Fork because he can't bear to leave a loss unavenged. Tywin is smart. Pride is the son he made," Ned said. "We'll leave the pride in a cage with bread and send the smart man to his castle with fires behind him. Robb will hold the western road. Bolton will make a show at the Green Fork and bleed as little as he can for as much noise as he can make. The rest come south with me. We'll go to Harrenhal and see if an old ghost can be dislodged from his seat." Catelyn put her hand upon his. "And our daughters?" He told her the truth like a prayer spoken without hope for an answer. Arya was somewhere between the city and Harroway, wrapped in a cloak of dirt and night and Yoren's stubborn care. Sansa was a prisoner being guarded by manners and knives in equal measure. "We need the Kingslayer," he said quietly. The queen will not trade for a lesser coin. If Stannis rides to claim the city with sea and righteousness, the queen will cling to Jaime like a drowning woman to a rock. We will pry her fingers away with him. Catelyn turned her face, and when she turned it back, he saw the choice she had made not to scream. Stannis, she said, and made the name a taste. You trust him. I trust the law, Ned said, and the words of a dead friend, and a thing that is made plain to the eye when you force it, as wood grain tells you where to split it. Stannis is iron and will do what he says even if it kills him and those around him. I cannot make a king out of better clay with my hands. Then we will take what is given, Catelyn said, because she had always had the courage to do that, and the courage to hate it without letting the hate master her. They rode within a week, leaving Edmure to rebuild his broken spine and Ser Brynden to scout like a thought ahead of them. Bolton went north and east with his pale banners whispering, and men who disliked him went anyway because the plan demanded it. Robb took the western road with Karstark's sons. The rest turned southeast for Harrenhal, where the tower shadows lay like old crimes upon the ground and the lake fed swans that had never seen mercy. The Riverlands were a song sung by a madman in those days. Amory Lorch burned a holdfast and laughed at the screaming because someone had taught him to. The mountain rode through wheat like a scythe riding a man. Women made bargains with gods who did not bargain. Beric Dondarrion, whom Ned had named in a clear voice in the throne room weeks and years ago, rose and fell like a candle in wind, and the Brotherhood that had no banner but an idea started thinking of themselves as a story even while they bled. Arya was taken and taken again. She drank water that tasted of iron and ate bread as if it had to be killed before it could be swallowed. She said names in the dark and dreamed of a tree with a face, and the dreams made her teeth ache. At Harrenhal, Tywin Lannister sat in a hall where one could imagine a dragon's shadow and made his lists. He made lists of grain and of men and of ways the river could be taught to flow backward. When Ned came into sight, Tywin blinked as if a candle had guttered behind a door and flared again. He had not wanted the Starks in his west and his east and his front, and he had certainly not wanted the Stark with the paper that said the city had wronged him. He sent Ser Adam Marbrand with riders to bite Ned's flanks and found instead that Mallister's men had sharp teeth and better horses. He sent ravens to every lord south of the Trident and east of the Gold Road and learned, as men do, that ravens deliver faster than men obey. They did not storm Harrenhal. No sane man storms a wound that size. They nibbled and gnawed and set fires under wagons and cut lines of supply and killed cooks and grooms and frightened boys who thought themselves knights. They took men and asked them questions and sometimes accepted lies when the lies told them where the fear lay. Jaime sat in a tower cell and smiled at jailers and sang songs that made their wives blush and their consciences itch. Ned went to see him once and found the man polishing his contempt like a bright coin. "You'll hang," Jaime said pleasantly. "I do not think so," Ned said. "You may. I will make effort otherwise." "You'll find my sister a hard knot to untie," Jaime said. "You always were better at separating head from truth than cutting rope." "I remember boys who pushed at other boys in the yard," Ned said. "You made a form out of it. But pride is not a virtue in a dead man." They were not at Harrenhal to win a castle. They were there to nail Tywin's boot to the floor while other boots walked. Stannis was moving. Word came to Riverrun that Dragonstone had launched, that Lyseni cogs and Stormlander galleys trailed behind king's ships like ducklings behind a grim father. Davos Seaworth, whose name only a few men knew and many would learn, threaded shoals while men in red stood at his stern and made prayers that tasted of smoke. Renly had run to Highgarden with banners and green knights. The Tyrells had crowned his appetite with a crown of petals. Stannis called him an usurper and called Lawler fire upon him in one breath and sent him parchment in the next. That story ended in a green tent where men saw a shadow that made them forget their gods long enough to make new ones. The Reach went to ground. The Stormlands opened their gates as if a wind told them to do it. The road to King's Landing was a throat with no hand around it. Ned pulled back from Harrenhal as soon as he heard Davos had cleared Massey's Hook with half his ships. He sent Tywin word of it by lightning, torches on the hills and a single rider with nothing but nerve to carry him. When they cut east toward the Rose Road, Tywin tried to slice their line with Gregor Clegane and 1,000 raw men who would not run away as quickly as they should have. They died on the ground they were given, and Grey Wind tore out a man's throat with a sound that made Robb's teeth hurt. When the dust settled, Tywin did something he had not done in years. He moved his army away from the road he wanted because someone else had kept it first. He went west for the Gold Road and tried to calculate time, supplies, and the arrogance of men in equal measure. For the first time in a generation, he miscounted. King's Landing had always smelled of men and heat and coins rubbed too hard. The day Stannis' sails turned the Blackwater into a field of canvas, it smelled like fear watered with hope. Cersei found wildfire in 1,000 hidden pots like a conjurer producing frogs and called it wisdom. The Alchemists' Guild smiled with cracked mouths and promised green miracles. The Hound looked at fire as if it were a man he had known and not forgiven. Sansa learned new prayers and kept them clean in her mouth and wondered whether they worked better dirty. She stared at the bay until her eyes burned, wanting ships and wanting the shape of her father walking among them. When Ned's vanguard reached the city, the Gold Cloaks cried out in confusion because their paymasters had taught them to, and then they cried out again because there were Northmen at their back and men with fish on their chests to either side, and someone had misplaced the Lannisters. Ned did not attack the walls. He did not need to. He closed the roads with men who dug ditches as if ditch digging were an art, and he sent ravens to Stannis with northern words that had no ornament and mucked their boots with truth. Stannis answered with a signal. 3 torches raised on the flagship at once, which meant one thing in a language made for men who fight at sea: tomorrow. The night before the battle, Ned stood upon the old hill where the dragon had once sat its cruel seat and listened to a wind that tasted of old ash and a sea that complained at being asked to carry men to their deaths again. He thought of Robert with his hammer, young and laughing and not yet ruined. He thought of Lyanna in a bed of blood. He thought of Benjen riding north and never returning to a place where seasons were short. He thought of Jon upon the wall, and of the talk he owed that boy, and of the talk he might never have a chance to give. He thought of Sansa and Arya and the way their hands had felt in his when they were small enough to sit in his boots, and he put all of that into his breath and let it out and did not pretend he had control of anything but where he would stand and when he would speak. The day the Blackwater burned, it burned green. The first 5 ships Stannis sent in were fire ships in disguise. They broke the boom with their own bones and smiled while they did it. Cersei's green fire ran up the Blackwater Reach and made a new sun, and Davos Seaworth lost a son and found a prayer that did not sound like any priest he had known. Men threw themselves from burning decks and found water that hurt more. The city's walls bloomed with arrows fletched in gold and fear. The Hound went into the gate like a man who meant to die if the fire asked him to live. Joffrey cried high and insisted that someone else do bravery where he could see it. Tyrion Lannister, whose name no man in the north had bothered to learn except to mock later, led a sortie with an axe and a face like a man who had discovered he could terrify himself and found it useful. Ned's men did not assault the walls. They cut down men who tried to leave them. When the Queen sent riders by the King's Gate at dusk to find Renly, they found Karstark swords instead. When Lord Giles tried to bribe the gate's keeper with a pearl and a horse, the keeper took the pearl and gave him to Ser Wendell as a gift. Around midnight, the Hound appeared at a sally port with a girl at his back and his face black with soot and the trembling of a man who had seen the inside of his own childhood. "For the god's sake, Stark," he growled, voice shredded. "Take the little bird home and let me not see another flame. If you want the boy king, go to the sept where his mother pretends she prays. I'm done." Sansa was older and younger at once. She put her hands out as if afraid to touch what she wanted. Ned took her as if she were 2 and newborn again, and something broke and mended in his chest at once. "Father," she whispered, and made of the word a piece of bread she needed to live. He sent the Hound away with water and silence. He sent Robb to take the sept with men who did not enjoy hurting women and did not find it necessary. He went to the gate to watch Stannis' men come through, dripping river and smoke but not fear. Stannis himself rode in armor as plain as an oath and looked as if his duty had offended his appetite again. Davos walked beside him like a hand that did what the mind could not. They did not embrace. Men who carry the realm upon their backs only embrace it. Each other they acknowledge. It could have been neater, Stannis said without preamble, looking at the bodies upon the river mud as if they were figures in a ledger that refused to sum. The queen set the river on fire and used it badly. The imp is not a fool. His eyes found Ned's. You are Eddard Stark. I am, Ned said. I have your place waiting for you. I can show you where the queen holds your nephew. My daughter is with me. Stannis's mouth tightened. Nephew, he said as if it tasted of rotten fruit. Put the boy in irons. Find the girl and the younger boy one of your daughters has told me something about. We will try them. We will try all who must be tried. Davos, if I speak in heat tomorrow, remind me of today. I will write it down if I forget. They found Cersei in the sept with a cup of wine and 10 more near it. Her hair was unpinned and her eyes had turned their beauty into a weapon she used on herself. Tommen slept with High's thumb in his mouth on a pile of cushions. A small dog lay near him guarding a prince it did not know. Myrcella was not there. A quick raven had put her on a ship to Dorne weeks before. Cersei's laugh was brittle and private. You think you've won, she said when Stannis entered with Davos and Ned and a handful more. You think law and men's love for it matters in a city that can be bought for bread and taken with fire. I think the law is the only thing men have that lasts longer than one kitchen, Stannis said without flourish. Stand. You will be tried and so will your son. If you are found guilty, you will lose your head. If you are not. He made a small, irritable gesture that did not fit the moment and perhaps fit him. We will find another way to make you harmless. Cersei stood. For a moment she looked like a girl whose understanding of the world had been betrayed by the world itself. Then she curled her lip and made herself a queen again. Do what you will, little brother, she said to Stannis with a name that was not his to her and never had been. You'll find the realm cares no more for your parchment than it ever did for Robert's love. She walked out between men who had fought all day and would fight again if asked, and did not touch the boy sleeping on his cushions. Sansa stood in the doorway and trembled as if remembering to be alive was an effort. Ned made to take her hand and then did not. There were things a girl must do with her own hands. Strong things and gentle ones both. Joffrey was tried 3 days later in the throne room where Ned had stood to name a man to chase a mountain and found before he could finish speaking that the city had had other plans. He looked smaller without his crown and without his certainty. He lied. He raged. He boasted about his courage while his voice cracked. Ser Barristan Selmy stood in white among red and black and watched an oath he had sworn change its shape. When the verdict came, Stannis spoke it in a tone that had no hatred in it. Men like him did not hate. They despised. Joffrey was taken and beheaded with a clean stroke. Not because he was a boy, but because he had been a king who had made himself a criminal and the law did not bend itself for blood. Sansa did not attend. Ned did not ask her to. He asked Davos to see to the body because Davos would do it with the dignity of a man who has scrubbed his own decks and knows what flesh is, whether lined by kingship or beggary. The city took a breath it had held for years. Jaime Lannister went into exchange like a gold piece that had been in the dirt and still gleamed. The queen had little left. The father had much. Tywin kept Myrcella in Dorne's good graces, kept the Reach guessing where their bread would be buttered next, and kept his head by keeping it down for once. He received his son at the Golden Tooth with a look no one there could interpret. There were ravens instead of swords for a time. Men wanted to crown Stannis in the September. Stannis let them argue, and then had himself crowned in a small ceremony upon the sea wall with the wind snarling at the banners and the sound of the water arguing with him like an old friend. Ned watched it and felt content and foreboding in equal measure, which is how men feel when they have done their duty and know the duty is not done. He took Sansa into his arms in a garden afterward where the southern trees wore blossoms like lies and his girl carried herself like a piece of winter carried to market in a shawl. Arya arrived a month later in the company of a band of ragged men who called themselves a brotherhood and a man with eyes like a river stone who spoke 3 names as easily as 3 lies. She was thinner. She was fiercer. She looked at the Red Keep like a place to be attacked someday for sport, and at her sister as if she had seen a ghost and found it acceptable company. They did not go home at once. A city is a wound after a siege, and it needs dressing and the firm hand that will keep flies from laying their eggs in it. Stannis was a firm hand. He sent Littlefinger to rule the fingers and keep his namesake in his mouth when he thought there were no ears about. He made Tyrion answer for the wildfire and forgive him for it in the same breath, which the imp seemed able to do better than other men. He placed Davos at his council, where Davos spoke like a man who had learned he had a soul only recently and took it very seriously. He asked Ned to stay and advise him on how to keep the North without cutting out its heart. "The North will keep," Ned said, "if you let it have the winter it belongs to and ask it for service only where the law requires. Keep your hand out of our kitchens and your boots off our feasts, and we will send you men when you ask and bread when you need it. Do not try to make Southerners of us. We would make poor ones." Stannis grunted, which for him was as good as an embrace. "The wall," he said. "Your boy is there. My son is there," Ned said. "And he writes of things that do not sound like wind in a fool's mouth. The Lord Commander speaks of dead men walking in black and blue eyes that do not remember. Ravens say the haunted forest is haunted again. The wildlings stir. Tywin Lannister I can fight with spears, that I do not know how to fight. You fight it by making men stand upon the wall who will not run," Stannis said, practical even as the idea scratched him. "And by sending them food and steel instead of sermons. Go north, Lord Stark. Leave me Davos and all these men who like words too much. Go to your snow and your dead trees and send me ravens when you need men." Catelyn and Sansa rode with him as far as the neck. Arya rode the whole way with a grin like a knife, and men who had meant to go elsewhere and found themselves falling into the habit of following a wolf. Theon Greyjoy did not betray them because he was not sent south with a promise to his father to choke on. He watched the sea at White Harbor and felt the old pull, and Ned saw it, and told Wyman Manderly to keep him busy at tables and in the counting rooms where patience is made instead of blood. Ser Roderick greeted them at Winterfell with tears in his beard and a sword at his hip, and Bran met them at the gate in a wicker seat with Maester Luwin behind and Rickon racing the dogs to the baked apple smell of the kitchens. The gods would took them into its quiet without remark. Ned kneeling there felt it as he had in boyhood. Not a reply, but a listening so deep it changed the tone of the blood in his ears. He set his head against the weirwood and thought of the men he had led and the men he had killed and the men he had sent to stand in a cold place and wait for a thing that takes most of us in our sleep when it comes at all. He thought of Jon's letter, careful and neat and almost monkish, describing blue shadows and signs in the trees and a cold that ate sound. He thought of Benjen. He thought that men can prepare for winter by putting meat away and making boots. He thought that some winters required other preparations. He went to the wall because the Warden of the North belongs sometimes to the North more than to the men who give him the words. The road there is a catechism, you say, with your horse's hooves. You pass the last good bread, and then the last good ale, and then the last good fire made of wood that does not scratch the back of your throat when you breathe. You find the barrows where kings who never learned letters lie with the thin crowns of their hair in rings. You watch the land rise in rough size until it stops short at ice carved by men with picks who were carving at their own holding of the world. The wall makes men small and honest if they are able to be either. If they are not, it makes them cruel. Ned looked up at it and felt both things and chose which he would be. Jon stood in black and looked like a Stark. The sight of him hurt and soothed at once. They embraced as men do who have hungers in them they cannot feed with words. Jon's eyes were older, and his smile had learned not to come easy. "Lord Stark," Jon said, formal as a wall. Then, raw, "Father." Ned put his hands upon his boy's face because there is a time to hold a line and a time to cross it. "Jon," he said, and the name was apology and pride and the breaking of a solemn promise he still could not bring himself to unmake. "You've grown." "I've been cold," Jon said, and laughed a little because the honest answer wanted to weep, and he would not do that in black. "The old bear sends his respect. He would send more if he had it. We need men." "You'll have them," Ned said, "and grain, and furs, and smiths who know how to temper steel until it sings in the cold instead of breaking." "Tell me what hunts you," Jon told him. Words could not carry cold, but they could show the shape it carved in a man. Ned listened with the concentration he had given to maps of the Riverlands, and when Jon finished, he went to stand at the top of the steps and look over into the haunted forest as if a thing unseen might be made visible by being regarded with the right attention. "Winter is coming," he said, because the words were more than a motto for cups and shields. They were an instruction. On the ride back to Winterfell, snow found them early, a handful of flakes that melted upon the cheek like small lies that turn out to be tellings of larger truths. Robb rode beside him with a seriousness that had learned not to be pride. Sansa watched the sky and spoke to Arya without anger. Catelyn kept her cloak tight at the throat and counted silently. Perhaps prayers, perhaps children. The road was rutted and the light short. The air tasted like the promise of a story too large for any single man to hold. News walked faster than they did. In the south, Stannis' justness made enemies as surely as it made order. The Reach considered and considered again, and after considering sent fruit and a daughter with a smile careful as lace to see whether the king tasted like something they could learn to like. In the west, Tywin Lannister set his jaw and rebuilt, and the songs left him out where he wanted to be, in the margins, plotting the day the song would turn back toward him. In the Riverlands, small fires lit in winter hearths where dead ash had seemed permanent and men remembered how to wait. At Winterfell, the hot pools steamed and the ravens croaked and the yard rang. Ned went among his people and did the plain work of a lord. He listened to quarrels about pigs and made men shake hands with men they swore they would kill. He set men to planting winter barley in places they hadn't before because the ground would hold it. He ordered new roofs. He sent carts north to Deepwood Motte and east to Carhold with grain and iron. He spoke with Galbart Glover about ships that could move upon the ice. He wrote to Stannis with calm and unornamented words about what the North required and what it could bear. He sat long in the Godswood when he had breath left at the end of days, and when he did not, he sat there anyway. One night, when the snow had come proper and the sky had that particular ring to it that says it will hold, he found Arya in the yard sparring with a boy too slow to be her match and too stubborn to admit it. She moved like water that had learned resentment and then learned how to use it without spilling. He watched her and counted the blows she pulled because she still wished not to break things when she did not have to. Later, Sansa would sit by the window with a small harp and play Unsteady and Beautiful, and the music would go out into the hall and over men sleeping with full bellies and the knowledge that the walls around them had been paid for with blood and decisions and would not fall for lack of attention. "Father," Arya said, sheathing needle and looking him up and down as if measuring him for a story. "Arya," he said, and the name was a promise to stand between her and 1,000 demands the world would make of her. "Do not kill your brother in practice. We will need him." She grinned with that knife again. "I know, but I need him to know he needs me." "He does," Ned said. "We all do." Later still, in the Godswood, he told Jon's name to the weirwood, to see if the tree would whisper it back with a meaning he could carry. Said nothing, of course. It never said anything. It let him say what he could not tell any living ear. He put his forehead to the bark and breathed, and the bark took those breaths into itself as if it had a use for them. When spring came, it came hard and grudgingly and only to leave again, as springs do in the north. Men counted their children and their storehouses with equal seriousness. Ravens came with tidings written in the scratches of men, who had an idea of a realm and how it might be kept from breaking upon itself like a wheel without a hub. Stannis held King's Landing with numbers and straightness. He took coin from men who had done well hiding coin and sent it to places like Eastwatch, where coin was a way to put iron and food into bellies and hands. He did not smile. He wrote notes in his own hand. He slept less than anyone and had to be told to eat, which he resented. Davos did what he could to make the king a man without unmaking the king. In the West, the Lannisters played at patience, which was a game they had not mastered, and waited for a misstep that men with honor sometimes make when trying to keep too many promises. In the Riverlands, the Brotherhood found that being a story yields believers and betrayals in equal measure. In the Neck, the Crannogmen did what reeds do. They bent and made boats where other men saw only weeds. In Dorne, a girl with a gold chain around her bed considered what the future owed her and what it would take to collect. In the North, men trained in the yard and in the woods. They listened to old women tell stories of blue-eyed things that took babies out of cradles and left ice there instead. They believed or they didn't, and Ned counted neither as a sin. He walked the walls with Robb in the evenings and made him talk through how he would feed 10,000 men for a month if the roads were closed and the winter town had already been squeezed dry. He took him to the armory to watch steel be made again, step by step, because war is made that way too. He let Robb see him tired and right and wrong both, because a boy learns from all of it. One dawn, as the mist lifted from the gods would pond in long, transparent fingers, a raven clawed at the glass of his solar with fright in its throat. The letter bore the black wax of the night's watch and no flourish at all. Jon's hand upon the page had become tighter yet and spoke without ornament. It spoke of a fist of men built from ice, of a horn sounded from the deep places of the forest that made the blood in the ear pulse against the bone, of men who died and did not stay that way. It asked for men. It asked for fire. It asked for belief. Ned read it once and then again. He stood, and for a moment he was a man transporting himself back and forth through time in the only way men can do it, by memory and decision. He went to the yard and called for Robb. He went to the hall and called for the maester. He sent for Manderley's son and for Meege Mormont and for Ricard Karstark and for Roose Bolton, though the last he would have done without if he could have. He brought them to the table and spread the map with its familiar lies and truths. He put a finger upon the wall and traced down as if drawing blood to Winterfell and then out to every holdfast that kept men fed in winter. "We are at war," he said. "We have always been at war and always pretended it was in the south where wine is. It is not. It has never been. There is a wall of ice and behind it a thing I do not understand and I do not have to understand in order to know that it will kill what it sees. We will send men. We will send food. We will send smiths. We will send boys who will come back men if they come back at all. And we will hold our own people safe while we do it. There will be no banners in this and no songs worth singing. Do it anyway." Roose Bolton's eyes went flat as fish. "And the South will live without us," Ned said. "It must. Stannis is a king who understands walls." He looked at Robb. "This is your work more than any of ours. You will take the men who do not complain at cold and see they use it to their advantage. You will leave the glory to men too hot-blooded to do without it. You will keep your people fed." Robb nodded slowly, absorbing weight as if it were iron he would be asked to carry upon his shoulders. "We will need oaths," he said. "We will need trust," Ned said. "It is harder to make and harder to keep, but cheaper to keep than to restore once broken." He paused and let the silence hold long enough that men remembered the shape of the room and the longer shape of their lives. He could feel the old gods listening, as he had in the marsh and in the south and as a boy under the snow. The wind moved in the rafters like something alive, and the fire found a new seam in a log and spoke about it. When he went back to the Godswood that evening, he brought no question that could be answered. He brought his whole life and laid it upon the ground because the ground takes it and is honest about what it does with it. He put his hand upon the weirwood's bark and felt the cold in it, the way a man sometimes feels love in his bones and cannot prove it to anyone else. He spoke the words he had always spoken and knew that they were not magic and were more necessary than magic. The words that had kept his people alive longer than law or crown. The night came on, older than any king, younger than any child culled by hunger. It smelled of iron and pine and the smoke of 100 hearths that believed in morning. Somewhere, in a castle of pale stone far to the south, Stannis Baratheon bent his head over papers and made straight lines out of crooked men. Somewhere, in a hall where the walls remembered dragons, a little man who had saved a city considered the cost and poured wine. Somewhere, in a house with a view of the sea, a woman fondled a necklace and made plots that tasted of lemons and blood. Somewhere, under black stone and older ice, something that did not sleep took a breath no man could hear and let it out again. Winter was coming because it always does. Eddard Stark stood under his tree and did not mistake the fact for a tragedy. He made it into a plan. He would not do it alone. He had never really done anything alone. He touched the bark, and behind his eyes he saw his daughters' faces, and his sons, and the faces of men who had followed him onto stones and into rivers and out again, and the faces of men who would die far north and never be sung about and would have done it again if asked. He lowered his hand and went to his hall to call his people to him and give them the news they had always known and were always being told for the first time, that they were alive together, and that was work. The snow sighed at the window, and the wolves in the forests beyond raised their voices, not in fear, not in hunger only, but in the old conversation wolves keep with the dark when it draws down early and promises to stay. Gray wind answered, and summer, and somewhere Shaggy Dog raised such a racket that Rickon laughed in his sleep and rolled toward the warmth without knowing why. The candles threw their light upon the stone. The door opened, and men came, and women, and boys whose hands would become men's hands, and girls who would sit in windows and carve their names small where no one would think to look. The winter town huddled between mountain and wall, and the keep rose above it as it had for longer than songs keep time. The old gods did what they always had done. They listened. Men spoke. The wind went about its business. And the north, remembering itself, lifted its head and set its feet the way men do when a long work must be done. For love, for duty, for the living and the dead, and because there is no one else to do it.